bookworms, my name is Celia and welcome to my channel. If you're anything like me, you love the fall and you love the cozy vibes, and I am here to give you a list of 10 cozy fantasy and sci-fi books. Sorry for all the folks who live in the southern hemisphere, who are getting fed up of seeing everyone talk about the fall, but I'm sorry. I just love autumn so much. I won't shut up. Book number 1, and probably the most well-known cozy book, at least from the list, is Legends and Lattes. And if you're into cozy fantasy, you've probably already read this, but if you haven't, then I'd recommend giving this a shot. This was a book that got me out of a really bad reading slump last year. I didn't read my first book until April, and that was this one. I was just in such a slump and I didn't feel motivated to read at all. But then I heard about this book and it just sounded like my cup of tea, and it absolutely was. If you don't know, Legends and Lattes is about this orc, Viv, who gets tired of her life of adventuring and killing monsters, so she decides to retire that life, and she opens up a coffee shop in a town that has never heard of coffee before. And along the way, she meets a lot of different people in the town, and they help her out in renovating the shop or all of that. And they built this small community, and it's just like, it is such a cozy read. Then we have A Psalm for the Wild Built. This is my all-time favorite book. This is a novella about a tea monk who is tired of their monotonous life, and they sort of just want a break from that sort of life, and they head off into the woods. And there they meet a robot who has just one question that it wants an answer to. And that is, what do humans need? Now this is a really beautiful, optimistic sci-fi with just such an amazing world that I would love to live in. Even though it's short, it really packs a punch. It just felt so impactful for me. It is the perfect book if you just want a little bit of a break from everything, and if you just want a hug and a reminder that it's alright if you don't have everything figured out, and it's okay to just live without having a deeper sense of purpose. Just thinking about it really makes me want to reread this. And this is a duology, and the second book is just as amazing. And it really just it got me very emotional. Also, the fact that the main character is non-binary is something that I just love so much. And this honestly is just the perfect book. Next up we have Mooncakes. This is a book that I read not too long ago. I read this in August. And while I was reading it, I was like, this is giving me such massive fall vibes. It is a graphic novel about this witch and a werewolf, and it is a romance between the two. It also deals with some heavier topics, but ultimately it is a really cozy read and really wholesome. And this one as well has just amazing representation. The main character is hard of hearing and uses hearing aids, and the werewolf character in this is non-binary. And the main character has lesbian grandmas who are iconic. If you like Legends and Lattes, you might want to check out Can't Spell Treason Without Tea. The tagline for this is, you like tea, I like books, care to open a shop and forget the world exists. And it's about these two characters. One of them is a guard for the queen, who is really awful, and the other one is a world-renowned mage, and the two sort of escape their life and go off into a small town where they open up a bookshop slash library slash tea shop. This one as well has the small town community vibes, and it is sapphic as well. I forgot if I mentioned that Legends and Lattes is sapphic. I felt like that was just a given, because I feel like everyone knows that, and also just looking at the cover, it's pretty obvious. But this one does have a little bit more action going on. I know there was a big discussion on Book Talk a few months ago about what classifies as a cozy fantasy, and I didn't really participate in that, so I might have missed some big information. So this one maybe doesn't technically qualify as cozy, because there is some action, but ultimately it is like still very heartwarming. Then we have A Tale of Hijinks and Honeydew. This is another shorter one. The main character in this is a mermaid who lives in a city where heroes are all the rage, and she is just like totally fed up with them. But she makes a deal with this other character who wants to become a hero, and so they sort of help each other out and maybe fall in love. And this one is really wholesome, and I actually had the pleasure of being an early reader for this one. I'm sure that the final version is even better than the version that I read, but it was amazing, and it also had like fantastic amount of representation. I'm talking disability rec, sapphic, non-binary, there's an ROA side character, and there's just like a lot of representation in this, which is something that I love about this author's books in general. I feel like they're a very underappreciated author. Given the amount of books that they've written, I think that they definitely deserve more hype. Next up, we have Kiki's Delivery Service. I talked about this one in my swapping screen time for reading vlog, but essentially this is the book that the Ghibli movie was adapted from, and it deals with this witch Kiki, who on her 13th birthday she follows witch tradition of moving out of home and living in a new town for a year, where she has to learn to be responsible for herself. She moves into this town that's a little bit bigger than the one that she grew up in, and people there don't really like witches at first, so she kind of has to win them over, and it's a really quick and wholesome middle grade. It's not quite as good as the movie in my opinion, but honestly it is still worth picking up. Next up, The Cybernetic Tea Shop. This is another novella, and it is a sci-fi. It is a story about an AI repair technician and a sentient robot. I don't want to like talk too much about it because it is pretty short, but they meet and they develop a connection with each other, and I think the world building was really interesting, especially from like the robot side of things. And this one is also queer. It is sapphic, and I know that the robot is like asexual, and first when I heard about that I was kind of like, oh, so it's just, you know, oh, robot, so like asexual. I was a little bit skeptical going in at first because I know that that sort of thing is kind of overdone, but I didn't get that vibe at all. When I read this book, it just felt like, oh, she's a robot, but she's also asexual, but they're not necessarily like connected. Next up, another shorter book, Coffee, Milk, and Spider Silk. This is by Coyote J.M. Edwards, and I love her other books as well. I believe it was called Unburied Bones or something like that, but I didn't include it in the list because those books are more leaning into like mystery and detective kind of things, but they are also pretty wholesome and definitely worth checking out as well. But I'm gonna focus on this one. The world in this book is just beautiful. It's full of all kinds of different monsters and creatures, kind of giving me Undertale vibes in some sense. And this character is a spider person, and she quits her job and opens up a coffee shop. When I was reading this, I was like, this is very, very similar to Legends and Lattes. And I was very surprised to find out that this was actually published before Legends and Lattes. It's a really quick read, and I highly recommend it. This author is another one that's like so underappreciated and just deserves so much more love. I know she released another book pretty recently, but I haven't gotten to that one yet, but I am really excited to read that one as well. This one is pretty popular. It's The Tea Dragon Society. It is a graphic novel written by Kay O'Neill, and it's just this really wholesome, quick read, and I just love the Tea Dragons so much. The characters in this are amazing. This has a lot of queer representation. I know the sequel has deaf representation, and they actually use sign language in that book, which is really cool. I just recommend this whole series. However, I'm also gonna be recommending The Moth Keeper by Kay O'Neill. People don't really talk about Kay O'Neill's other books. Like, don't get me wrong, the Tea Dragon Society deserves all the hype it gets, but I feel like some of their other books are kind of overshadowed. The Moth Keeper came out relatively recently. I think It came out this year, and it is about this group of people who live in a nocturnal society, and they have this like mutually beneficial relationship with the moths. And there's this tradition that there is one person who is the Moth Keeper who helps guide the moths to the cave that they're sleeping in when morning comes. But it is a really lonely profession. But this book talks about Anya, who wants to become the next Moth Keeper. And that was the list. Those were some of my favorite cozy fantasies and sci-fis. I of course do have a few more of them, and there are a lot that are on my radar that I want to read. If you've read any of these, or if you have any other recommendations, please feel free to comment down below. That was it for this video. If you liked it, please give it a big thumbs up, and I hope to see you again very soon!